Another Impact Wrestling star has departed the company, plus we have an update when it comes to Night 2 of Impact Wrestling South Philly Showdown tapings. All this and more in today's Impact Wrestling news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of Impact Wrestling, so let's start off talking about another departure from the company. And frankly, last time we spoke about someone leaving, it was Fallah Bahh, and the report did note at the time to expect more departures to be announced or revealed or reported in the coming days because people are coming to the end of their contracts or new people are being brought in, and as is the way in pro wrestling that if you bring people in, people have to go at the same time. So the latest name to depart Impact Wrestling is former Impact Tag Team Champion, former member of LAX, Hernandez. Hernandez is reportedly done with Impact Wrestling. Now, Hernandez is reportedly done with Impact Wrestling, according to a report by Fightful Select. According to the report, Fightful confirmed with the former LAX member that for the time being, he's finished up with the company. He did clarify, though, that things ended on good terms with Impact Wrestling, and it was left open that he could return to work for Impact or with Impact once again in the future. Now, obviously, for the last 2 decades, Hernandez has worked with Impact Wrestling on and off, really. Of course, he worked with them as part of Homicide, LAX, Conan back in the day with LAX. He also had a singles run during the sort of Russo into the Hogan and Bischoff era. He came back to Impact Wrestling in 2020. This latest run with Impact has lasted from 2020 to 2022, so 2 years. Now, he last wrestled on the January 6th edition of Impact Wrestling on Access TV. The report also confirmed that Hernandez actually didn't have a contract during his most recent run, and he was working on a handshake deal. Now, of course, over the last several months, as I just mentioned, we've seen the likes of Larry D, Rohit Raju, Jake Something, AC Romero, Kimberly, Matt Striker, Brandy Lauren, and Rachel Ellering leave the company under various circumstances. And I think it's worth pointing out there with those names that, again, the circumstances vary in a lot of those cases. For instance, Impact wanted to keep Jake Something, but ultimately he decided to go elsewhere once his contract expired. Rohit Raju, when his contract expired, it was a negotiating process. Impact thought he had this value and Rohit Raju wanted a little bit more, and the terms, they left on amicable terms, but Rohit Raju said, you know what, maybe I'll go away, and then if they offer me the money that I'm looking for, I'm happy to go back. And Impact basically sort of said to him, look, if you can go get over somewhere else, and then maybe, make this decision easier for us, kind of situation. Whereas in the case of, say, Larry D, he just wasn't being used and he requested his release. Same with AC Romero, wasn't being used, requested his release. Matt Striker, his contract came to an end. Impact Wrestling decided they were going to go in a different direction when it came to their commentary team, aka Tom Hannifan and Matthew Rewald, which I think are a very, very, very strong commentary duo. And Rachel Ellering, who knows what was going on with that situation there. Some people talking about the birthday tweet and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Look, Hernandez, there was a period of time, and this is a long time ago, and this doesn't even really include this recent run, but there was a period of time where Hernandez was a really, really promising name. I remember Hernandez being booked 2009, again, this is pre-Hogan and Bischoff, but not too long before that, 2009, when he was split up and he became Supermex. He was over. Like, he was super, super over. And some of the things he could do for a man of his size were incredible. Like, obviously, the border toss move that he did was frightening. There were a couple of occasions, I remember vividly one with Doug Williams, where he border tossed him, and if you over-rotated enough, bang, right on the back of the neck, it was nasty. But there were some things he could do with it because he was just so strong. He could border toss people, he'd throw people for miles. It was incredible. And not just that, he wasn't just a big strength guy, and of course, he was incredibly strong, but his agility back then, not so much in this most recent run because he's an older guy at this point in terms of his career, but in the sort of the 2000s, some of the things he was able to do for a guy of his size, I mean, I would say easily, 280, close to 300 maybe, but like a muscular 300. He was able to run and dive over the top rope like nothing. He was doing splashes off the top rope. He's an incredible worker. And again, in this most recent run, was he doing anything of real substance? Not really. He would maybe be part of some comedy skits. He would maybe be involved in BTI tapings, but he would never really have, shall we say, a feud of substance. I think maybe the last real thing of substance he did and this might have even been before his most recent run, is when they did the whole LAX versus LAX storyline, in which they had Santana and Ortiz versus Homicide and Hernandez, and Eddie Kingston was involved in that, and Conan was involved in that. That's the last real time I can recall being like, okay, that's really something of substance there. And I might be wrong. You can let me know in the comment section below what you think about that. But this is, as I spoke about before, this is just, I guess, going to be part of the situation in Impact Wrestling now. And we're in a really unique time, I think, frankly, when it comes to pro wrestling in terms of free agency, as I spoke about before. And this includes AEW, this includes New Japan Pro Wrestling, this includes Impact Wrestling. Is that there are so many names that are on the free agency list because of the amount of people that WWE have let go. And prior to that, I guess, have signed on contracts, and they decided, you know what, that's just too much money, and they're making more money than they ever have now because of those budget cuts. There are so many names on the free agency list that usually really wouldn't be on the free agency list, and because of that, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, they're moving things around, they're shaking rosters up, and I spoke about before, I still do think, because he hasn't signed anywhere, Wyndham Rotunda, I think AEW obviously want him, but we know that Impact Wrestling really want him. And they've missed out on a couple of names that they really wanted. Buddy Matthews, that looked like that was a done deal. Ultimately, he goes to AEW. They wanted Adam Scherr. Remember, before Bound for Glory, it was almost guaranteed that he was going to show up, and he didn't. And now he's in CYM with VC3, whatever that is. You are in control. Second rule, you are in control. Apart from all of these moves you can't do. Like, what? Those rules were wild. So I think because of that, it maybe would make a bit of sense to get some people off the books and maybe make a big offer for Wyndham. I don't know that's what they're doing. This is hardly a scoop here. This is just kind of the way I look at it. And as I mentioned, all of those names that have departed Impact Wrestling, they've been on various different deals and various different terms and various different reasons for their departure. I think it's fascinating once again, and it's nothing really new because we've spoken about this so many times here on the channel when we cover Impact Wrestling, that for 2 years, Hernandez had a handshake deal with Impact Wrestling. That's how they operate. There aren't a ton of people. I think people kind of get this sort of mistaken. There aren't a ton of people in Impact Wrestling that have exclusive contracts or have signed contracts. There are obviously big names, Moose, Josh Alexander, Jordan Grace, etc. There are names that have contracts, but there are some names that don't. People like Hernandez, they'll be on a handshake deal. I still think Matt Cardona's on a handshake deal, and he debuted, when was it, 2 years ago at this point? Or over a year ago, 18 months ago. He's been on a handshake deal at the same time because Impact Wrestling are so keen to get names in that will maybe create a bit of buzz or could work for them. But they realize that a lot of people don't want to be signed to an exclusive contract to Impact because they want to work other places. They also realize that Impact tapes, twice, 4 times a month? And maybe that's not sustainable. That's not enough. So when you're working on a handshake deal, you can be much more flexible. And that's the situation. From Impact's perspective as well, it's much more flexible for them because when they decide, actually, you know what, we're not going to use you anymore, they kind of just say, we don't really want to use you anymore. And that's the situation there. So I'm sure Hernandez will probably be back at some point. I mean, Larry D requested his release. He already appeared for Impact Wrestling once again in those Kentucky tapings because that's where he's from. So don't be surprised if you see Hernandez show up in Impact Wrestling in the future. We're going to talk about the South Philly tapings, night 2. Some spoilers here, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I'm not going to read them list by list, but just the key highlights. But if you don't want to be spoiled, you can click off now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's get into it. Of course, Impact Wrestling held night 2 of their South Philly Showdown TV tapings on Saturday night at the 2300 Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, formerly known as the ECW Arena, of course. Some couple of big things I did want to point out here. So we spoke about night 1, saw Rocky Romero competes for Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling's Rocky Romero, which I said was a surprise and kind of not a surprise, I suppose, given the New Japan Pro Wrestling crossover and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, Rocky Romero's office when it comes to New Japan as well. But he's been all over the place, right? He's been competing, obviously, for New Japan, but he's also been competing for AEW, part of Roppongi Vice, and now he's in Impact Wrestling as well. He faced off, interestingly, against Jonathan Gresham, who last night actually became the Progress World Champion. And just look at the situation that Jonathan Gresham is in right now. It's completely wild. This is a guy, he is the Forbidden Door at the moment. So he's the world champion of a company that is owned by Tony Khan. So that's AEW's only Tony Khan. So he's the Ring of Honor World Champion, but that's owned by AEW Tony Khan. He just won the Progress World Championship, which is affiliated with WWE. And he's also competing in Impact Wrestling against a star from New Japan. Oh, and also, he's the founder of the Terminus Pro Wrestling Federation as well. So there is so much going on in the world of Jonathan Gresham. You have to give it up to him. Now, I don't think he's going to be making as many appearances, I think, for Impact going forward, as I mentioned before, because it looks to be like he's going to be continuing with Ring of Honor, Tony Khan's Ring of Honor. I don't know if he'll sign a contract with Ring of Honor or AEW, but it looks like he's going to continue there. So I don't really know in the future what the crossover is really going to look like with Impact Wrestling. We'll have to wait and see with that one. A big angle that did take place, though, at the Impact Wrestling South Philly Showdown television tapings, Night 2, was a confrontation between Bullet Club and Honor No More, which is something I had kind of predicted. I had predicted this, that we were going to see some sort of faction warfare going forward. And I did wonder, and this was why, because I wondered at the time, I went, there's a lot of Bullet Club influence on this show, and I understand that it's the New Japan crossover, but when you look at who actually is consisting of the Bullet Club nowadays, the majority of it is Impact Wrestling talent. It's the Good Brothers, Chris Bay, and Jay White. Only one of them's a New Japan Pro Wrestling contracted talent. Yes, the others appear on New Japan Strong and all that kind of stuff, but the majority of it is Impact Wrestling talent, and it kind of, it sort of makes things, trigger off in your brain. You go, what are they doing there? And then suddenly you see Honor No More come in, and you go, they're going for faction warfare. So I don't know what they're building towards. I mean, historically, in the history of Impact Wrestling, April used to be lockdown month, right? It used to be lethal lockdown, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's where they're going, but I would love to see the Bullet Club versus Honor No More lethal lockdown. That would be tremendous. Whether or not they'll do that, I don't know. But everyone loves a good faction warfare, so that's certainly going to be very interesting to see. Now, they did actually have a match in which the entire Bullet Club faced off against Honor No More, Kenny King, Vincent, Matt Taven, and Mike Bennett. But again, I don't know if that's just, they just did it for the taping and then they're going to move on. But it seems weird to sort of plant the seeds for that and then just not revisit it later on, especially when you've got a big pay-per-view coming up, especially when you've got multiverse of matches coming up, which the whole point of that is to have stars from different companies facing off against each other. So that will be certainly very curious to see. Keep an eye out for that one going forward there. We had an interesting ECW cameo at the television taping as well, in which Little Guido, formerly known as Nunzio in WWE, but Little Guido in ECW, faced off against Impact Wrestling's digital media champion Matt Cardona. Now, I don't know if this was a title match. I think it might be, according to some reports. But Matt Cardona facing off against Little Guido is great. Is great because Matt Cardona, especially in that environment, is getting so much heat. I mean, he's the ultimate heel in GCW, right? Because he's the WWE guy in the modern day ECW company. So him being in the ECW arena, the challenge for Matt Cardona, I suppose, at the moment is that you don't want him, look, he's super over as a heel. But the issue with a heel is you can start off being booed, but it's one thing to continue to be booed. Because eventually, everyone loves heels. Everyone loves the anti-hero. Everyone loves bad guys. The most difficult thing is to continue being booed as a heel. And in that environment, I know it's the ECW arena, but in that environment where there's a lot of smarter fans in attendance, Philadelphia crowd, which is a heel town, they prefer heels. How do you continue that he gets booed? Put an ECW original out there and have him beat the hell out of him. Smart booking. Very smart booking by Impact Wrestling. So I'm interested to see that. And who doesn't love Little Guido as well? Some of the biggest beatings have been taken by him. I remember a period of time he was a referee in WWE. Remember that? It was like early 2010s, 2011s. He just was randomly a referee for a brief time in WWE. That was certainly interesting as well. We also saw a segment in which Moose had his lawyer to come out and apologize for his recent actions regarding Josh Alexander and his family. Of course, that segment finished Impact Wrestling on Access TV this past week when Moose showed up at Alexander's house. However, he instead knocked Alexander and promised to show his family what a real man was. This brought out Alexander, and soon it turned into a brawl with security and Scott D'Amore coming out. The segment ended with Alexander hitting the C4 spike on Moose off the apron through a table. As I mentioned before, I wasn't huge on the segment because I didn't think the feud needed it. But obviously Impact Wrestling does, and leading out of that angle, they're getting this big moment where suddenly now it's personal. But it was personal before, because Moose screwed Josh Alexander out of the Impact World Championship. I don't think they needed to take it to that next level. But obviously Impact Wrestling did, and that's the situation. So that was really the big news to come out of the South Philly Showdown tapings. Of course, as always, guys, once it airs on television, we'll speak more in depth about it, because as we saw last week of Impact, right, nobody knew that Moose segment was going to happen because that was pre-taped and obviously no fans were in attendance, so it wasn't spoiled online. So once we see these things air on television, we'll speak about them again, because they take on a completely different life and a completely different context once they are on television. So we'll speak about that then. But anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts on today's Impact Wrestling news stories in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe to Wrestle News 365, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.